and welcome to week 9. This week there is no textbook reading, so just be sure that you are reviewing this full PowerPoint in order to get all of the information for this week. First, we'll talk about the PA State Dental Practice Act. This is the act that kind of involves everything that we do as an EFTA, everything we're allowed to do, what we aren't allowed to do, and the state's expectations as an EFTA. So let's talk a little bit about the state government first. State governments are given authority and responsibility to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the state's citizens. The practice of health professionals is governed under this authority, which includes us as EFTAs. The structure of each state's government is prescribed in the state constitution. Next, we have the branches of state government. So typically it's divided into 3 different branches. First, we have legislative. They are authorized to enact laws or statutes that prescribe or prohibit activities within the state. Next, we have executive, which plays a major role in the implementation and enforcement of the prescriptions and prohibitions enacted into law. And lastly, we have the judiciary. So they are the final arbiter regarding the rights and responsibilities to the laws. So 3 basic parts. It's very similar if you've learned in high school, the different parts of government as well. Same things. So we have the PA State Dental Practice Act. The practice of dentistry is regulated through those branches, so we have to follow these laws for the state of Pennsylvania and the state of Pennsylvania only. We cannot look at like Ohio or Maryland's laws. We have to look at the PA laws. And it is intended to minimize the public risk of adverse healthcare outcomes. The State Dental Practice Act is the government regulation that most specifically controls the practice of dental professionals. So there is a link if you go under the actual PowerPoint. You can access this link as well. It'll take you to the PA State Dental Practice Act itself that you can look through in full if you'd like. We're going to cover a little bit here and there that specifically regards EFTAs coming up. So the PA Dental State Practice Act defines an EFTA as an individual who holds a current valid certification under this act to perform reversible intraoral procedures authorized by this act under the direct supervision of a licensed dentist and under an assignment of duties by a dentist. An expanded function dental assistant may, under direct supervision, perform these procedures specified in section 1110, which we'll get to soon, and other reversible procedures not designated by this act to be performed by licensed dentists or dental hygienists. So keywords here, reversible. It has to be something that can be reversed by the dentist, and we also have to be under direct supervision of the dentist as well. So direct supervision means that a dentist is in the dental office or treatment facility, personally diagnoses the condition to be treated, personally authorizes the procedure, and remains in the dental office or treatment facility while the procedure is being performed, and before dismissal of the patient, personally evaluates the work performed. So they have to be in the office, they have to have been the one that diagnosed the work that needs done. They have to authorize that the EFTA can do it, and then before the patient leaves, they have to check the patient and make sure the work looks good. Very important stuff. You can't just finish doing a filling and send the patient out the door. The dentist has to check before they leave. So next, let's cover who can become an EFTA. The PA State Dental Practice Act says that an EFTA must be qualified, not less than 18 years of age, has good moral character, not addicted to drugs and alcohol, and they also have to have done some type of program. So number 1 is a 2-year associate degree program. Letter B is a hygiene program, and then letter C is what we are, where you're getting the certification in an EFTA program. And then secondly, you have to pass an examination that has been adopted by the board. So they also say that you need some forms of continuing education. So for an EFTA, you are required to have 10 hours of CE courses every renewal period, which is every 2 years. So this just goes in a little bit about what kind of continuing education meets the requirements there. 10 credit hours, And then 1 credit hour is defined as 1 hour of instruction. Now, you obviously don't need to renew anything yet because you haven't even became an FDA. So this will be important down the road for you, but I'd still like to cover it anyways. There is a link here if you want to look at the PA State Board of Dentistry's renewal guide. But in the future, you can just go to the website, look up the renewal guide. So for continuing education, for your renewal, you have to have 10 hours of CE every 2 years prior to the renewal. Of those 10 hours, 2 must be the continuing education in child abuse recognition and reporting. We are doing the initial 3 hours that are required this week actually in class, but for the future, the renewal is just 2 hours. No more than 50% of those CEs can be online or individual study. They can be 50% online and then 50% in person or a live webinar. A live webinar course is considered a lecture if there are like a question and answer period where you can actually ask questions live and they get responded to you right away. And then a CPR course as well is required. It must be hands-on and it does not apply towards the 10 hours, but it's still required. You have to have updated CPR. Then the renewal period, it's every 2 years and due by March 31st in odd years. The cost is $31 to renew. So a change of information. What happens if you change your name or address? Any changes need to be reported to the state board within 10 days. There is a form you have to fill out, super easy. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about licensing. So the board does ultimately have the authority to refuse, revoke, or suspend your FDA license at any time for the following reasons. Number 1, if you fail to demonstrate the qualifications or standards for a license contained in the State Dental Practice Act or the regulations. So you're not meeting the qualifications or standards. Number 2, if you are making any misleading, deceptive, untrue, or fraudulent representation. So you're lying, being untruthful. Number 3, you are practicing fraud or deceit in obtaining a certificate for an FDA or making a false or deceptive biannual renewal with the board. So say that you lied about having your certification, or else you are lying about your CE courses that you didn't do them. You're lying that you have updated CPR and you didn't, something like that. Number 4, you've been found guilty of a crime or misdemeanor involving moral turpitude or having been found guilty of a felony in violation of the laws of PA. And then number 5, you have your certification for an FDA revoked, suspended, or any disciplinary actions imposed upon you. So essentially they're just taking the certification away from you because you did something wrong. And then to continue on licensing, reasons why you could have your FDA certification revoked. You violate any of the provisions of the Act, which we'll go over a little bit more in depth in a future slide of what you can and cannot do. You are knowingly maintaining a professional connection or association with any person who is in violation of the acts in the PA State Dental Practice Act. So say that you're working with a dentist or a hygienist or an FDA who actually doesn't have their license and you know that they don't have their license and you continue working with them and don't report them, you can have your license revoked as well. Engaging in unprofessional conduct, so anything that's considered unacceptable. And then committing an act of gross negligence, malpractice, or incompetence can get your license revoked as well. If you are engaging in false, misleading, or deceptive advertising. And then lastly, if you are putting your patients at risk of some sort, whether it be towards an illness that you have, you come to work drunk, you come to work on drugs, any like mental or physical conditions you may have, and it puts your patients at risk. So these are just a few of the main points that PA says you can get your license taken away for this. So let's talk a little bit about the FDA scope of practice. What are we allowed to do and what aren't we allowed to do? An FDA may perform the following procedures: placing, carving, and contouring amalgam restorations, placing and finishing composite resin restorations or sealant restorations, performing coronal polishing, performing fluoride treatments, including fluoride varnish, taking impressions of teeth for athletic appliances, placing and removing of rubber dams, placing and removing of wedges, and then lastly, applying cavity liners and bases. So what are we not allowed to do? An EFTA may not perform the following procedures: complete or limited examination, diagnosis, and treatment planning. We can't diagnose anything. That is the doctor's job. Surgical or cutting procedures of hard or soft tissues, prescribing drugs, medicaments, or work authorizations, taking impressions other than for study models, diagnostic casts, or athletic appliances. So final impressions, we cannot take those. Final inspection and approval of restorative and other treatments which affect occlusion and any necessary occlusal adjustments. So we can't final inspect anything like our fillings, anything that may affect a patient's bite. The doctor has to come back into the room and do the final check. Pulp capping, pulpotomies, other endodontic procedures we can't do. And placement and intraoral adjustments of fixed and removable prosthetic appliances. We're supposed to do those outside of the mouth. And then lastly, we can administer local anesthesia, nitrous, any anesthesia. That's up to the doctor or the hygienist if they have a anesthesia license. So some other state regulations, issues that may be regulated by state laws but may not be specifically incorporated into the State Dental Practice Act include abuse reporting requirements, biomedical waste and hazards management, business operation practices, consent to treatment and informed consent, criminal activity, disability accommodations, education and training requirements, liability for volunteer services, malpractice, and malpractice insurance as well. Patient confidentiality, and then public health reporting requirements. So all of these things, not necessarily in this PA State Dental Practice Act, but still things that we need to consider in our professions. So how do we file a complaint with the PA State Board of Dentistry? So when an illegal or unethical act is committed, we should be reporting this to the PA State Board of Dentistry. Again, going back to things that can get our license revoked, knowing that the dentist you work for, the hygienist you work for is doing something that they shouldn't be doing is a reason you can lose your license. So it's really important that we report these types of things so that we protect ourselves. If you report something, there is a link there. Obviously, I hope you're not reporting anyone yet, but if you need to, the link is there. In the future, just go to the PA State Board of Dentistry's website, and then you should be able to file a report through there. So once you submit a report, the case is going to be reviewed, and kind of an action will be taken, whether it's just like a verbal warning or a full license revocation, disciplinary charges, jail time. It kind of depends what the situation is. So next we're going to talk about mandated reporting. So going back into things required to become an EFTA, we do need a 3-hour mandated reporter of child abuse training before we can become an EFTA, and then every renewal period we need an additional 2 hours of that child abuse training. So we'll start with the initial 3-hour one. So most states have enacted laws that mandate the reporting of child abuse. In PA, mandated reporters include individuals licensed or certified to practice in any health-related field under jurisdiction of the Department of State. That's us. Or employees of a healthcare facility or providers licensed by the Department of Health who are engaged in the admission, examination of care, or treatment of individuals. So dental professionals, of course, should be familiar with their personal responsibility to report abuse. We see lots of kids in dental offices. I personally have seen kids who have been abused coming into the office that we've had to report. You can tell by bruising on their bodies. If their oral health just is like horrendous and the parents aren't willing to do anything about it, we usually report them too, just because that is abuse if they're not willing to get the care that their child needs. Child abuse and neglect are widespread public health problems, and this problem, it really does span every type of population, no matter how much money you make, no matter what cultural, ethnic backgrounds you come from, abuse can affect everybody. So when we are required to make a report as soon as we see it. It's not required that the child come before the mandated reporter in order to make a report, and they're not required to identify the person responsible for the abuse, because you may not know. It could be their mom brought them in and the dad's the one abusing them. You really don't know. You don't have to know. You just have to say, hey, this child appears to be abused, and the nice part about it is the investigators figured that part out of who's doing the abuse. It's not up to us to decide. So how can we report this abuse? So there is a child line number, or if you go to the PA State Compass website, you can also report electronically online. But usually just doing it over the phone and explaining the situation is a little bit easier.